Sitting in the dark corner of the room, cigarette smoke drew spirals in the air as I tried to bury the wreckage of a day that should be forgotten. The phone rang. I ignored it. Nothing good could come from that call, but the insistent ringing broke my resistance. I answered. On the other end, a calm female voice, but loaded with something irresistible, an urgency soaked in secrets. "It's about Elisa Lam," she said bluntly. Elisa Lam. The name was like a key turning in a long-sealed door. Dead in the water tank of the infamous Cecil Hotel, a case as strange as it was disturbing. Though closed, the questions lingered like ghosts that no one dared to face. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of my mouth. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But then why did that call awaken something inside me? I put out the cigarette and looked out the window. The night was cold, empty, and that darkness outside mirrored what I felt inside. I put on my old overcoat and left. Maybe it was instinct, or perhaps it was that eternal search for answers that I didn't even know if I wanted to find. The cafe where we arranged to meet was on the outskirts of the city, far from curious eyes and illuminated streets. The kind of place that attracted people like me, invisible but always alert. The air there seemed heavy, dense with poorly kept secrets. I entered, my body warming slightly as I escaped the biting night wind. I sat in the darkest corner of the place, where I always sat. Invisibility suited me well. I ordered a coffee more out of habit than desire. Lately, alcohol had been my constant choice, but I knew that to deal with what was coming, I needed to keep a clear mind. I looked at the clock, my old companion from my police days, as the minutes dragged on. Finally, the door opened, and Rachel Thornton walked in. Rachel was a journalist, known in the city's darker circles. Small, thin, with black hair tied up carelessly. She had the look of someone who had seen too much and still wanted to see more. We had met before, always for professional reasons, never casually. However, at that moment, her face showed something different. Concern, perhaps. Fear. She approached without hesitation and sat down in front of me. "I found something, Morgan. Something the police didn't mention." Her eyes pierced through me, searching for a reaction that I had long since learned to control. I remained cold. That was how I kept people at a distance. "Tell me already," I murmured, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. Rachel slid a photo across the table. Elisa Lam, still alive, sitting in the same room where she would die days later. But that wasn't what caught my attention. In the background of the image, partially hidden, was something that changed the entire narrative. A diary. Elisa's diary, Rachel whispered, her voice almost reverent. I took the photo and examined every detail. The room seemed the same since the last time I was there, but the diary, something that was never mentioned in the reports, was new. My instincts screamed something that I preferred to ignore. Did the police miss this? I asked, with an ironic smile. Of course, it wouldn't be the first time something important disappeared in a case. Lost, hidden, I don't know. But it was there when the photo was taken, and now it's simply gone. I hated feeling this way. I hated the feeling that something was being hidden, but worse still, I hated the idea that I would have to return to that damned hotel. Rachel stared at me, her eyes searching for something I wasn't willing to offer. Trust. You want me to go after the diary? It wasn't a question. She nodded, and I could see something else in her eyes. Fear, yes, but also an urgency that unsettled me. Someone doesn't want this diary to be found, Morgan, but I need to know what happened to Elisa, and you're the only one who can find out. I stood up, leaving a few bills on the table. The air in the cafe felt heavier now, as if it too knew what was to come. I put on my overcoat and looked at Rachel one last time. I'll go after the diary, but if you're hiding something from me, you'll regret it. She didn't respond. I knew she was afraid, but I also knew she wasn't the type to give up easily. Something in that woman drove her to seek answers, just like me. The difference is, I had stopped believing in them. I left the cafe with an uncomfortable feeling in my chest. Something was wrong. Something told me I was entering a game I didn't control, and in the Cecil Hotel, nothing was as it seemed. The Cecil Hotel was a remnant of something that should have been forgotten long ago. A concrete monster corroded by time and the tragedies that accumulated like layers of grime on the walls. For those who knew its history, every corridor hid a denser shadow. Every room carried a more oppressive silence. When I entered the lobby, the characteristic smell of mold mixed with something old and metallic hit me immediately. The people who worked there, the few who remained, were used to the strange. That helped me. They passed by me without noticing, as if I were just another part of that place. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing through the empty corridors. The familiar sound of footsteps reverberated, but something felt different that night. The hotel was quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something. The feeling was familiar. I had felt it before, in the darkest moments of my life, when reality seemed to slip into the unknown. Elisa Lam's room was on the 6th floor. When I reached the door, something made me stop. It wasn't just the memory of the case that haunted me. It was the unsettling feeling that crossing that door would be crossing an invisible line. My trembling hands tightened the coat pocket. I hated this weakness. I hated what it meant. Finally, I turned the doorknob. The door gave way with a low creak, and the room swallowed me in its suffocating darkness. The place was almost untouched. The bed with crumpled sheets seemed abandoned only a short time ago. The shadows on the walls danced under the dim light from the hallway. Something in the air, a vague smell, perhaps, brought back a memory. My daughter, missing years before, and the night I first entered her empty room. There was no coming back from that feeling. I knelt down, and as Rachel had said, the diary was there, half hidden under the bed. Its edges were worn, and the yellowed pages seemed to hold secrets that time had not erased. When I opened it, the content disturbed me. The first pages were filled with disjointed scribbles, as if Elisa was trying to give shape to something she didn't understand. Geometric drawings, strange symbols that I couldn't identify. But as I went on, the writing became more legible and disturbing. Elisa spoke of shadows, whispers at night, entities that followed her through the corridors. It wasn't just the words that bothered me, but the feeling that as I read, something in the environment around me was changing. I closed the diary and put it in my pocket. I needed to get out of there, but before I could take a step, I felt it. It wasn't a new sensation for me, that feeling of being watched, of something around me in the shadows, a presence. I turned towards the door, but nothing seemed out of place. My trembling hand slid into my coat pocket, where I felt the cold metal of the pistol, a ritual to maintain control, the control I pretended to have. I quickly left the room, trying to ignore the cold sweat starting to drip down my forehead. I had felt this before, and I knew something had been awakened. Driving through the dimly lit streets of the city gave me a false sense of normalcy. The cigarette smoke swirled out of the half-open window, and I tried to focus on anything other than the diary, now sitting on the passenger seat. Elisa Lam was dead. Whatever was in the diary should have been buried with her. But now I carried more questions than answers, and one of them led me to Isaac Carver. Ike Carver was the last person I wanted to deal with. An eccentric, expelled from academia for his paranormal theories, with a distorted view of reality. I hated depending on him, but in cases like this, his chaotic mind was useful. When I entered the bar where Ike usually spent his days, the air of decadence reminded me of the Cecil Hotel. The smell of decay permeated the environment, cigarettes, cheap alcohol, and something indefinable, like bad memories left behind. Ike was at the back, as always, wrapped in his old velvet coat and scarf. His dishevelled grey hair and round glasses gave him the look of a modern-day alchemist, someone who knew more than he was willing to share. His eyes sparkled when he saw me. "Morgan Graves," he said, nodding. "I knew you'd be back." I sat down in front of him without responding immediately. I pulled out Elisa's diary and placed it on the table. Ike frowned, his thin fingers carefully flipping through the pages. "This here is more than just scribbles," he murmured. "And what the hell does it mean?" I asked, my tone impassive as I tried to control my growing frustration. Ike ran his finger over the geometric drawings, his expression growing more serious with each passing page. "These symbols, they belong to an ancient language, the language of shadows." My patience was wearing thin. "What does that mean?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed a shadow of concern in his eyes. "We're not dealing with something ordinary here, Graves. This is serious. We're talking about entities that exist outside our world, things that feed on fear, despair. They don't follow the rules of our reality." The silence between us became unbearably dense. Ike rarely showed emotion, and seeing him with that heavy expression didn't leave me at ease. The Cecil Hotel, Ike continued, is a point of convergence, a place where these energies intersect, where bad things accumulate and eventually escape. Elisa Lam somehow came into contact with that, and it looks like you're involved now too. I wanted to laugh at that. And you think Elisa Lam summoned these entities? That she knew what she was doing? Ike shook his head, his eyes fixed on the diary. Not on purpose, but she was drowning in her own questions and ended up touching something that should have remained asleep. Now that thing is awake, and it's after you too. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the suffocating feeling that was enveloping me. The hotel, the shadows, Elisa's death. Everything seemed to blend into a narrative I didn't want to accept. But deep down, something told me Ike was right. I stood up, taking the diary back and putting it in my coat pocket. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, but now it wasn't paranoia. I knew there was something following me. "Are you going to continue with this, Graves?" Ike asked, his voice lower now. "If you keep going down this path, you'll find what Elisa found, and maybe you won't like it." Returning home should have been a relief, but as I opened the door to my apartment, the familiar feeling of comfort had vanished. The silence that once welcomed me now felt hostile. The shadows in the corners of the room were denser, darker, as if the air was too heavy for them to move. Something had changed. I placed Elisa's diary on the table and sat in the armchair, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. The smoke, always my most faithful companion, this time seemed to swirl more slowly, dragging through the air as if it hesitated to dissipate. Each puff, however, did nothing to relieve the weight that seemed to increase within me. It was just fatigue, I tried to convince myself. Maybe the excess of coffee and stress were leading me to a mental state I preferred to avoid. But the sound of whispers began to emerge from somewhere distant, or perhaps very close. I blinked, trying to focus, but the sounds didn't stop. They were there, like a subtle murmur, growing with each second. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, a shadow. Not a common shadow, like the result of the dim light from the lamp. It was a figure, distorted, almost human, but impossible to define. It moved slowly, almost as if it were observing me, studying my reactions. I blinked again, hoping it would disappear, but it didn't. It stayed there, motionless, staring at me. My heart raced. My sweaty hands tried to control the cigarette, but it slipped, falling to the floor. I jumped up suddenly, and the shadow vanished as quickly as it had appeared. In its place, only the usual emptiness remained. I wiped my face, cold sweat dripping down my forehead. "You're getting paranoid, Morgan," I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize what had just happened. But deep down, I knew it was real. This wasn't the first time I had faced something like this, and I had the terrible feeling it wouldn't be the last. I knelt to pick up the fallen cigarette, but on the floor next to the table was Elisa's diary, turned and open to a page I hadn't read before. The glance I threw at the pages was quick, but the words were there, like a silent scream leaping off the lines. The shadows are here. They watch me. They whisper when the light goes out. I can't run from them anymore. They know where I am. I closed the diary with force, and tossed it onto the table, backing away as if it were infected. The feeling of being watched hadn't disappeared, and now I knew that Elisa wasn't just dealing with a mental disorder. There was something more, something that had escaped from a place that should never have been opened. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by visions of the shadows. They approached slowly, growing on the walls and deforming until they took on grotesque shapes. They followed me like predators, waiting for the right moment to strike. The whispers grew louder, and when I woke up with the sheets stuck to my sweaty body, I knew I needed to return to the Cecil Hotel. It was a cold morning, wrapped in a fog that seemed to reflect what I felt inside. Every step I took through the empty streets brought me closer to answers that I knew I didn't want to find, but could no longer avoid. When I entered the hotel lobby, the receptionist barely looked at me. Better that way. I climbed again to the floor where Elisa had stayed, but this time, something in me knew I had to go further. Elisa's diary was only the tip of the iceberg, and whatever was hidden in the hotel was deeper. I walked through the poorly lit corridors until I noticed a door without a number. The paint was worn, and the smell of mold was strong, as if that part of the hotel had been forgotten. Something told me this was where I would find what I was looking for. I turned the handle, and the door opened with disconcerting ease. There was a staircase descending into the bowels of the building, the air becoming increasingly dense as I went down. The smell of dampness mixed with something deeper, older. When I reached the bottom, I was faced with a rusty iron door. When I opened it, what I saw made the air freeze in my lungs. In the center of the room was a circle drawn on the floor, full of symbols identical to those in Elisa's diary, but much larger. The candles around it were nearly melted, forming a complex pattern. There was a palpable oppression in the air, and whatever had happened there, it was not of this world. I ran my fingers over the cold floor, feeling the weight of the place. The circle seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, something that shouldn't be touched or understood. And at that moment, I was certain that Elisa Lam wasn't just scared or disturbed. She had opened something, and whatever it was far beyond what I or anyone else could explain.